Yesterday, of course, we had the big reveal, the moment that the moment that Yosef finally tells his brothers that he is alive and tells them quickly to go and tell their father that he is alive. But of course, what we have here, a very interesting way, continuing in the Parsha, is Yaakov at first does not believe that. He doesn't believe them. Yosef sends lots of stuff with them. Paro instructs them to bring lots of stuff with them. The Egyptians, everybody's super excited about the brothers of Yosef. They see the success that Yosef has led to Egypt, and now they're getting 11 more people like him, talented, thoughtful. They're excited about it. And they go to their father, and they tell their father, Od Yosef Chai. Joseph is still alive. V'chihu Moshel b'chol eretz Mitzrayim. And I'll translate this. In fact, he's the ruler over all of Egypt. Vayafag libo ki lo hamin lahem. But his heart was numb. He did not believe them, or hamin really means to support. He did not support them. He did not believe them. And this is considering, it's back about what we said yesterday and in the previous days, that Yaakov can't possibly believe them. He doesn't have the capacity at this point of his life to believe them. He's living in a state of depression. Talked about it, the 22 years that Yosef was gone. Talked about how, right, when they come up and they say, we have to bring down Binyamin, and he says, you can't go down that, because what does he say? Vikara lo ason baderech. He's not going to come back alive. There's going to be an accident that is going to happen to him. It's not possible for Yaakov to believe in a good future. It is something that to him is completely 100% implausible. His heart and his spirit is gone. And that's the tragedy of Yaakov's life. The tragedy of his life are these 20 plus years where he doesn't live. And as we pointed out yesterday, the Midrash, he doesn't get prophecy. He doesn't get nivuah. It's not something that he can believe. And so one of the interesting things is the usage of words here. What do they say to him? They say, Od Yosef Chai. Yosef is still alive. And it says he doesn't believe them. And then they speak to him. And then he sees the agalot. He sees the carriages, the wagons that were brought up to bring him. And Vatichi Ruach Yaakov Avihem. Yaakov's spirit is revived. Again, the word chai. And then in the next pasuk, what does he say? Finally, he says, Vayomer Yisrael, Israel says, Rav Od Yosef b'ni chai. My brother Yosef is still alive. And there's a beginning of his spirit being revived. Now, his spirit is not fully revived, because what does he say? And this is the last verse in 45. Elcha ve'ereh b'terem amut. Let me hurry, right? I need to go see him before he dies. Yaakov is somebody who some sort of spirit of his is being revived. And the word chai here, the way that it's working is, right, he hears it, but he doesn't believe it. He doesn't believe in chayim. He doesn't believe in life. He only believes in problems, in death, in famine, in children going missing. And even though Binyamin has returned, and even though Shimon has returned, and things look like on the upswing when the brothers come and tell him, it's not something he believes. But somehow he sees the wagons. He starts to believe it. He says the word, right? He now understands that his life can continue. And if we go, what's the beginning of next week's parsha? Vayigash-Yaakov be'eretz Mitzrayim shvas reishana. Finally, Yaakov is able to fully live the last 17 years of his life in Egypt. Finally, he gets to a point where he can live fully, where the depression and the worry and the complete fear and the anxiety that has governed his life, probably forever, probably since the day that he stole his brother's bracha, the fear that he has of Esau who wants to kill him, the caution that he has to always be living with when he's in the house of Lavan, who tricks him over and over again. The anxiety and the fear after he leaves Lavan, and he goes and he's on his way, and he's scared of his father. He's scared of meeting up with Esav. And even after he leaves Esav and everything seems fine, going back to Parshat Vayigash-Yaakov, Bikesh Lashevet B'Shalva is what the Midrash says. And that doesn't happen, right? What happens to him immediately is Ma'aseh Yosef, the story of Yosef and the destruction of his family. His life is constantly a struggle. It's constantly a fight. And he expresses that later in this week's Parsha to Paro, when Paro asks him about his life, which we'll talk more about. But here we see the partial revival of spirit, but it reveals the tragedy of Yaakov's life, the difficulty of everything that he faces and everything that he goes to, and the complete lack of belief, the complete emunah, the trauma that he is living with. So here, but we see with Yaakov here, interestingly, sort of is the development. There's something interesting here if we think around the words, right? Yosef is called Chai, while Yaakov is not. If you think of the words, right? What does Yaakov say here? This is before he goes down Egypt. It says, Vatechi Ruach Yaakov, the spirit of Yaakov is revived, but Yaakov doesn't say sort of I'm alive again. It talks about Yosef is alive. And it's an interesting note, because it's almost as if Yaakov understands that he can live fully only through his relationships. Life comes through relationships. When he understands that Joseph is alive, then he can be alive. It's not just biology, it's relationships. Because he has the relationship with his son, Yosef, once again, he can be fully alive. And so we see really here tragic, but a development. And I think, something that is important here is the idea of this transformation and this change. Lots of people who struggle and live a lot of struggle in life, and you can't get back those years. That's the tragedy of Yaakov's life, the Avel Gadol that completely encompasses Yaakov during those years that Yosef is gone. But he does have this, in a sense, this last hurrah. He does have these 17 years of Vayigash-Yaakov be'eretz Mitzrayim, which we'll get to. And right, going back, almost interestingly, right, what does Yosef say to them? Even before this, he says, Ha'od Avichai, is my father still alive? And their answer is yes. But really, honestly, the answer is no, he's not really. Biologically, he's alive, but he's broken. He's not fully alive during the years that Yosef is dead. And maybe Yosef almost needed to hear that. And that comes back to sort of what we said yesterday, the day before, to an extent, when Yehuda sort of changes the story. Yes, Yosef, you are the number one victim in the story, but your father's a victim as well. Your father really isn't alive. And if Binyamin doesn't come home, he will go down to Sha'ol. Binyamin is also a victim in this story because he is not allowed to live. He's not allowed, Ray, to go down, to leave the protective womb over and over again. The same thing here. And we think very much what's going on here with this family and their destruction is that they're not allowed to fully live during these years because of the brokenness. I'm going to go back to something we said sort of the other week. When we talk about this, first talk about the Pesach Seder, many months away. We talk about Matchil Bignut U'Mesayim B'Shvach. I'm leaving in 2 minutes, and then you can have this. So also, yeah. Okay. Just have to finish this call, and then it's all yours. Matchil Bignut U'Mesayim B'Shvach might be 4 minutes, not 2 minutes. But right, what is the idea? Part of the idea is that the Pesach story starts with Yosef, and we talked about this. Right, what happens? The brothers, they take his coat, they break it, they dip it in blood. That is karpas and yachas, the ketonet ribui pasim. Karpas, the coat of many colors. We don't dip in blood. We don't eat blood. We dip it in salt water. And then it's yachas. The family is broken. What happens at the end of the meal? What happens is we call it the afikomen, when we break, when we restore that middle matzah, that hidden matzah, the representative of Yosef. But what's it called? Safun, the hidden one. Safnat Paneach, the hiddenness. Yosef is the tzafun. Yosef is safna panech. Yosef is the one who's hidden. So the Pesach Seder, we go from karpas to yachatz, safun. It's hidden away, and only when the family is united can we once again live again. And that's what happens to the family here. Yaakov's life is back. Binyamin is alive. He can join history. Yosef is alive. The family is put together. Is everything perfect? Is there no tension? Of course there's tension. Of course there's fear. The brothers don't trust that Yosef is truly the person who he's supposed to be, that he's never going to take revenge. But that is the redemptive story of the family. And that's the beginning, in a sense, of the redemptive story after the slavery of the Jews in Egypt, which we celebrate on Pesach. So the family is divided. Karpas, yachatz, it's broken in half. It's hidden away. Safud, the revelation that the family can be once again together. And that's, in a sense, right, skipping ahead to later on in the Torah, in a sense, the idea of Moshe, one of the ideas of Moshe and Aaron together taking the Jews out of Egypt. Aaron is not upset that Moshe is the number one leader. Aaron is not upset that he's number two and Moshe is number one, because redemption starts with the individual, redemption starts with the family, and only later can redemption happen to the nation. You cannot be redeemed as a nation until a person is redeemed. You cannot be redeemed as a nation until a family is redeemed. And so in many ways, this story is a blueprint to other stories of redemption that we have here. But here we see sort of the development of Yaakov, the sadness when we think about the tragedy of his life and the trouble and the struggles that he goes through. But ultimately, the development and the word Chaim here, the word that finally he's going to be able to really live again, something that was denied to him and something to an extent that he denied himself to himself, and something that he denied to Yosef as well. And it's a very challenging story. And finally, the last 17 years of his life, he can live and be alive. And so we have the story. Continue with more of it tomorrow. We'll get into perhaps something we skipped over today, the Agalot, and understand more about this. But a great moment, a moment the brothers have been looking forward to. Yaakov has been looking forward to something he doesn't believe as well, but finally, Chaim, his life is restored.